Welcome back, everyone. My name is Justin Sheffield. I'm the head of School of Geography and Environmental Science, and it's my real pleasure and honor to introduce Professor Dianna Smith. There you are, down there. Yes. New professor in the School of Geography and Environmental Science. So I'm going to give a bit of background about Dianna and her work, just to provide a bit of context, and I'm sure she's going to fill in lots of details later. So Dianna is a leading researcher in understanding and addressing pressing social issues, primarily around food security in the UK. That's the link, apparently. Her groundbreaking work in this area is drawn from the Fair Food Project, which is a major initiative funded by the BBSRC, and builds on a very long list of funding successes previously to that, including 3 earlier projects co-developed with local government and civil society, and you'll see that as a theme throughout Dianna's work. And this work has been funded by NIHR Applied Research Collaboration, Wessex. So Dianna is perhaps best known in her work for developing the Food Insecurity Risk Index. This is an innovative neighborhood measure of food insecurity, which has had significant impact, providing councils and charities with a crucial tool to identify and address food insecurity hotspots. Since its inception in 2018, the index has been updated annually, demonstrating its ongoing relevance and utility in the fight against food insecurity and food poverty. Dianna is a fantastic collaborator. I can just see you over the top of my glasses and the screen here, working closely with colleagues across various disciplines, including public health, politics, and social sciences. Her work is therefore highly interdisciplinary, which enhances its academic depth and broadens its reach and impact as well. And it's certainly true that Dianna's work does go beyond academia, being deeply embedded in the community, driven by a strong civic agenda and a commitment to collaboration. She has forged vital partnerships with councils and food pantries and banks, directly impacting on the lives of many. And this extends to hands-on service, as evidenced by her role as a trustee at the Citizens Advice for New Forest. Now, Dianna asked me to be brief in my introduction, which I've failed miserably at already. But that request does mean that there is much that I won't mention in a CV that is very long and very deep as well. So again, I'm hoping you will fill in a lot of those important details about your journey up to this point. I will also mention, before I do stop, the significant national role that Dianna plays as the Deputy Director at the National Centre for Research Methods, indicating her leadership and expertise in shaping the tools and approaches that many of us use to conduct rigorous and meaningful research. So I will stop here eventually, and please join me in welcoming Professor Dianna Smith.
I'm not convinced that was written by ChatGPT, Justin. Janae, sorry. Thank you very much. That was kind of surprising to listen to, and it wasn't quite as succinct as I've been hoping for, but I will appreciate it, and I'll say thank you. It's really kind, and thank you to everyone who's joining us here today in person and online. Mom, hopefully you've got the sound working. That's pretty important to me as well. I thought the tenuous link was fish, because I put fish fingers in my title, and Clive talked about fish quite a lot. And then I listened to Clive's talk, and it was actually quite a lot about food, and I thought, well, excellent, because actually mine's all about food, because I am pretty much food obsessed. And actually, I would say after this last week in our School of Geography and Environmental Science, I'm not the only person food obsessed. Because, that is a bit of an in-joke, but we've had a discussion via Padlet, which is anonymous, around whether we should go plant-based for internal catering. Oh my goodness. We have lots of Padlets for lots of things to gather experiences and kind of, feedback, and nothing usually happens, and this time it has just exploded. Everyone's got an opinion with references and bar charts. It's been brilliant. So this is why I do food, because everyone's got something to say about it. Isn't that good? So let me tell you about what I have to say around food, and I'll try to keep it to 40 minutes. I can see the clock, which is good. Someone just flag me if I'm going too long, really. And see if I can get this to move forward. Oh, there we go. So why food? I want to start off, again, on the kind of theme of collaboration. One of the things that I'm really pleased about that we've set up recently here in Southampton with colleagues who are here in the room, I'm looking at Ravita and Duncan in particular, is a Southampton Food Partnership, and it's building Southampton as a sustainable food place. And at the core, what we are doing is working across business, the university, the civic agenda, local government, to ensure that we are creating a better food environment in Southampton for everyone. So it's really working towards affordable, sustainable food. So I've skipped ahead a bit because I got excited. But what I want to say is that food is a great one, not just because everyone gets quite excited when they might have to go plant-based and might have to sneak in some meat to the university catering, but not everyone has the same choices around food that we do. And I'm just going to assume here in the room that most of us have good choices around food, and we're quite fortunate in this way. There are a lot of barriers to eating well and having a healthy diet, and this falls into what I would call the social, well, not just me, lots of folks call the social determinants of health, the things that are barriers to us living well, whether it's around food or rather around physical activity or alcohol consumption or anything else. There's all these sort of factors that affect some people more than others. And that's what I'm really interested in. Why is it that we have in this country so much of an issue around people being able to eat well? So food, in my opinion, is a human right, and I'm not the only one. And that's the framing I'm starting from, and that's what my entire career has been based around. Core question is, how can we make food affordable and sustainable, environmentally sustainable, for everyone? Now, where do fish fingers fit into this? Was it just clickbait to get you here? We'll find out. On a more serious note, this is exactly the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So for quite a long time now, as you'll see as I move further into the talk, one of my core interests has been around the cost of food. Most of us have probably experienced that food is more expensive now, isn't it? Doesn't matter how much money you have, you're going to notice you're paying more for milk, eggs, the kind of, sorry for the vegans in the room, I've just listed 2 things that are not vegan, but bread, other things which are really essentials. And the Food Foundation is a fantastic organization here in the UK that tracks all sorts of factors around food. One of those is the cost of food. So looking at 1,000 calories of food, looking at healthy food like we'd see on the Eat Well plate, the unprocessed stuff, the fresh fruits and vegetables, whole grains, things like that, versus less healthy foods, high-fat, salt, sugar items, crisps, which, by the way, I love, and all sorts of other things, biscuits and sorts of things like that. We can see that healthy food costs twice as much per calorie versus unhealthy food. So if you're trying to achieve a healthy diet, and we all know the kind of guidance around 5 a day, and those sort of activities, it's really hard if you're on a budget, because when you're on a budget and when you're trying to save money, food is the easiest thing to save money on, rather. So the reason we have this issue around food insecurity is largely because if you are facing constrained circumstances with less money, the first thing, the easiest thing for anyone to cut back on is how much they spend on food. Maybe it's downsizing to going from Waitrose down to Aldi, or something more severe. So that's what we're talking about today, or rather I am. Hopefully you'll have some questions and be intrigued. My friend Hannah and I are both going through the process of doing our inaugural lectures, and she had the really good idea of having a nice theme to go throughout this. And my theme is definitely food, but also fairness. And that ties in nicely to the grant that I thank goodness got when I decided to title this as Fair Food. And it's about fairness and equity and justice around the food system in particular. So I'm going to talk a lot about food poverty or household food insecurity. In this country, in the UK, we use food poverty more often, but household food insecurity is the other kind of descriptor of it, and that means someone or household who's not able to meet their needs through the usual kind of socially acceptable means of going shopping in the evening or at the weekend to buy what they want. And it's measured through a series of questions, and there's a whole bunch of different versions of this, and I had a wonderful chat earlier today where we really geeked out over it, but I'm going to simplify it down to asking simple questions around, have you had to cut back on your portion size recently? Have you had to skip meals recently? Have you ever run out of money and not had enough to buy more food? Have you ever run out of food, rather, and not had enough money to buy more? So those sort of questions are used by the US Department for Agriculture and many others now, including the Food Foundation, in their quarterly survey to capture the prevalence of food insecurity in the UK. For a long time, this wasn't really captured very effectively. It was in national surveys like Food and You and Food and You Too. And as of 2019, it was introduced into the Family Resource Survey, so we started to have more of a national picture of how many people in the UK were experiencing food insecurity. But prior to that, we didn't really know. And if you don't know, you can't do much about it, right? It's not as much of an issue. But what we can see from this diagram here, and I won't dare walk over there, I'll probably trip over and fall off the stage, is that food insecurity was much higher before COVID, then it dropped down because things were in place like the furlough scheme, and people weren't going out as much, so we weren't spending so much money. And there's also a lot of a huge charitable uplift. You remember that back in 2020 when there was lots of good feelings and things happening. And then we see it spike back up, and currently we're at about 13.9% of the UK population who would answer yes to one or more of those questions around running out of food and not having enough money to buy more, skipping meals, and so on. The answer to this, from a policy response here in the UK, is charity, which leads to potentially a postcode lottery, because the charities are there where there is capacity, where there is people who are running the food banks, the food pantries, where there are volunteers to be available, where there's a place to actually hold them. The number of venues which have had to close down in Southampton because of something happening over the last few years is really noticeable. So we finally have the national level data, but as Justin's helpfully covered, what we don't know is where it's happening locally, and that's one of the things that I got really interested in early on. So we know that there's 13.9% of the population experiencing food insecurity by the Food Foundation measure. The UK government puts it more at about 10%, and I believe there's another survey which puts it around 20%. But we don't know where those people live. And if we can know where the households which are experiencing food insecurity live, then we can make sure that more charitable resources are targeted where they need to be, right? So that's something I'm really interested in. Then, I'll get to this in a moment, but is there a neat answer between all the kind of food waste we hear about? So lots of food being wasted, there's lots of surplus food in the system. Can we move that where it needs to be for food insecurity? It sounds really good. It's not that easy, and we're going to find this out very fully in FAIR, I can assure you. But I want to highlight something very clearly. I'm going to be very critical right now of the food system in terms of the food aid system, but I'm not critical of the people in the system. I'm not critical of those who are trying to meet the needs of everyone who needs help. I'm being critical of the system we're working within, which has created a scenario where charity is a #1 response to food poverty in this country. Okay? So when I'm being critical, it's not of the people doing the hard work. It is of the situation we find ourselves in. Very quickly, I'm going to tell you what food banks are. I think most of us know. These are a referral-based system, so if you find yourself in a situation where you can't eat well enough, you need to get some help, you can get a referral to a food bank through citizens' advice, social prescribers, GPs, schools, but ultimately it is a point of vulnerability because you're having to admit that you need some help. And this does put a lot of people off, which is the last bullet point there. We know that only about 20 to 50% of people who, when answering questions, would be classified as food insecure, use food banks. So that's a huge gap right off the bat. There's a free or limited choice, so you get between 3 days or a week's worth of food. Again, a bit of a postcode lottery there, depending on where you happen to be and what your local food bank has, what they can provide. Again, not critiquing the food banks. The food is, it's sourced from donations, surplus redistribution, which I'll explain in a moment, or more frequently, especially now, it's having to be purchased in to meet the need. So it used to be this tidy model, in theory, of food being donated, like the bins we see at the end of the supermarkets, or pulled out of surplus and sent to the food banks, but now a lot more of it's having to be bought in. And crucially, the nutritional quality of the food, again, not being critical of the food banks, but the reality is a lot of it is high-fat, salt, sugar items. It's ambient goods. It's not going to be the lovely, fresh produce we see on the Eat Well plate. So we have a challenge in that the food that we're offering people who are most vulnerable isn't what necessarily they need to have. And the food bank is the kind of prevalent model, but I would say that the other kind of factors that we'll talk about are the food pantries, where you pay a little bit of money, so it's a higher agency food aid intervention, and you go shopping. Or there's social supermarkets, again, where you pay, you might have a membership, and then you go and you buy heavily discounted goods. Or there's mobile food larders in the New Forest, where I volunteer, and what we do is we have the surplus food, we box it up, and people pay between £2.50 and £5 for variable sizes of food, boxes of food, which include fresh produce and other stuff as well, like the tinned goods. So there's different models of food aid, but food banks are the ones we're most familiar with, I believe. And then there's this move towards more than food banks, where people come to a food bank, but they also get wraparound support from charities like Mind, Citizens Advice, or so on, in terms of benefit maximization, mental health support, other things that might help lift them out of food poverty. Surplus food. Well, I decided to put a quote in here directly from the Coronation Food Project, which highlights talking about tackling food waste, not surplus food, and I really do have an issue with this. We should not be suggesting that food waste is the answer to food poverty, because once again, we're putting people who are in food poverty in a position where they should be accepting what is available uncritically. And in fact, it is surplus food we're talking about, so I'll stop being pedantic about what's on His Majesty's website and just point out that, yes, we do have a lot of surplus food. I found another site which very helpfully said we have 330,000 tons of edible food that's wasted or repurposed as animal feed before leaving the farm gates. That is shocking. That's a huge amount of food in the country, isn't it? And we also always hear a lot about household food waste, but the surplus food we're talking about is much more the surplus food that's the yellow sticker stuff that wasn't bought at the end of the day in Tesco, and it's picked up by Fair Share, which is the big redistribution charity, doing a great job at exactly this. And they take it and then they redistribute it to the local charities, like the food banks we have here in Southampton, the food pantries, and so on. So I would just say surplus food is not the magical answer. First of all, we have a lot less of it because wonderfully, we're trying to reduce food waste by changing food labeling. So that's put less surplus food into the system. That's increased competition for what is there. And then we have Trussell, which is formerly Trussell Trust, is the main food bank. And then we have Fair Share, who are these kind of two big players that you should probably be aware of. But what's interesting is how corporate social responsibility is framed here as well. So if we'll say Waitrose, I'll pick on Waitrose for a moment, if they're taking their surplus food and they're giving it to Fair Share, who's picking it up and then redistributing it wherever else, Waitrose have effectively taken the food off their ledger, so they don't have the food waste, they've dealt with it, and Fair Share then takes it and moves it on. And as long as the food is great, fantastic, and it's been picked up, brilliant. But that's not quite always the case. So the UK is not short of food. We are making plenty of food where we could grow more. We could certainly grow more produce. I know that national food security is an issue. But we have lots of food. We have enough food to feed everyone. It's the distribution that's the issue. So it's about how we get a fairer distribution of food where it needs to be, especially the healthy food, not just the high-fat, salt, sugar cast-offs or the mislabeled goods that might be somewhere else. So corporate social responsibility is very much on the website of Fair Share. If you work with us, this is one of the things that you can achieve, is this corporate social responsibility. And it's true, it is very good. And I think that's a great way to look at things, but we need to think about it a bit more carefully in terms of the quality of food going into it. Are they slimy carrots, which I've seen far too often, that then have to be disposed of by the small charities? That's the surplus. So that's then the responsibility of our little local charities to deal with somehow. How do we deal with that? So we've got a situation where food insecurity is an issue. Surplus food looks like a nice answer, and in some ways it really is quite appealing. Claire Thompson, my colleague who I'll talk a lot more about, and hopefully is tuned in as well, has posed the question about, do we stick with the food banks, which are a very good model, free food, but also I forgot to mention quite limited in terms of how often you can use it. And I should also have said the food pantries and so forth are often self-referral. So there's less of a barrier to using them, but you have to pay for them. So it's a good way to move up the kind of food security ladder, but it's not perfect either. Anyway, it's what we've got. Or do we adopt cash-first responses where we give people vouchers to go shopping? That sounds nice as well. And this is where I want to pause and say that we talk about food poverty, but actually it's just poverty. It goes back to what I said earlier about the fact is people cut back on food because it's easy to cut back on. It's something which they can manage to do. And then we try and address the issue of food poverty by giving people food in another form. But actually what we need to be doing is dealing with income inequality in the country. And it's not just our country either, by the way. I'm from the US, obviously, and boy, do we have issues there too. Okay, but let's pause from the kind of lecture, and I'll tell you why I'm so interested in food. Because you're wondering, well, how did some nice young woman from Texas get into this anyway? So there we go. There's a lovely picture. This is where I grew up. Doesn't it look pretty? Those are bluebonnets, state flower. I love them. The barbed wire is not there for effect. That's reality. This is my mom's house. And it is absolutely stunning in April, less so in July when it's really hot. My mom grew and sold plants. This is one point. Her dad was also a vegetable farmer, so it definitely runs in the family. My dad was an engineer, both self-employed. As part of what we did on this beautiful piece of land, we grew 500 tomato plants to sell tomatoes at a farmer's market. So I was a very cute 4-year-old with cherry tomatoes I was selling. In 1988, my folks bought a garden center. So my dad was still working, but we had a family business which doesn't allow for a lot of time off. This probably explains my work ethic, my problematic work ethic. It was also very, very hot, very, very hot. We had one tiny room for air conditioning, the rest of it was a big metal shed. So in those years of 12 to 18 before I escaped to university, against my wishes, I'll come to that in a moment, a very strong work ethic. When you are a family business, you are very much reliant on your hours you put in. This probably explains a lot now about me. I also learned that I do not ever want to be self-employed. So instead I work at a university and pretty much am as close to self-employed as you can be, but get a wage. The hours are similar. High school, boy, that did not suit me one bit because I am a bit of a nerd and an only child and like to read a lot, so I didn't really fit in very well. It turned out I was really good at certain things. I joined Future Farmers of America, and if you gave me a class of 4 cows, I could put them in order like that, from best to worst. I know, who even knew that was a thing, right? I've clearly put this in to keep your attention in, which has worked, which is good. I was also very good at land judging, so squeezing soil through my fingers to see if it was sand, silt, or clay, and hauling hay, because, I did a lot of labor on the weekends. So I definitely had that kind of thing going on, but I was not enjoying school. I didn't enjoy the social side of it. I got really unwell when I was about 17, and the high school counselor I got really unwell with a kidney problem, which was kind of a shock, and we didn't know what to do about it. And of course, I was at a very small school, so there were lots of rumors as to what was going on with Dianna. And my high school counselor was a lifeline. So I thought, well, if I've got to go to university, and my mom said I had to go, by God, I was going to be a school counselor so I could help people like she helped me. So that was my grand plan, forcibly going to university. I'm a bit flaky, it turns out, because I got to university and didn't last in psychology even the first week. I got distracted. There were so many interesting things to learn. And this is one thing that I was really grateful that my folks pushed me to get to university. Yeah, my friend Bex is looking at me in complete shock. 8 degree changes. The great thing is in the US, you can be flaky. And you can change your degree a lot because you're doing a 4-year degree. The first 2 years are foundational stuff. You can do placement tests because you can prove that you can actually speak Spanish and don't have to take 3 classes to do that. And I thought, well, I still want to do something useful. So I kind of dabbled around in biology. I loved biology. I loved biological sciences. And I even got into nursing school before I realized I was a little bit too squeamish for that and dropped right back out. And then, right before my final year of university, with most of a biology degree under my belt, I stumbled into a geography class called Human Use of the Earth. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is it. I get to read papers. I don't have to memorize stuff quite so much, spend so much time in a lab. I can drink coffee and chat to people about what I'm learning. And this is amazing. And so geography it was. And I was really fortunate. I had some amazing professors at the University of Texas where I was. We had about 5 members of staff from the UK, so I was already kind of getting into that area and realizing that there was a whole other world outside of Texas. I was also, as a result of that first class, developing a really strong interest in the relationship between health and what you were exposed to. And I read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, who was, by the way, a biologist who loved to read, which was pretty much me at that point. It was all about the exposure to pesticides and the possibility for cancer. So I was fascinated by this, and then I read a different article, because again, gnat-like attention span, about the drop in calcium content in broccoli over 20 years. It's very clear in my head. I can still see the picture of the head of broccoli. It was a magazine article. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I wonder if it has something to do with the way that food's being grown. Again, coming from a family where we grew food. So I got a short research post. I knew by then, I thought I probably wanted to go into more research because I really liked university. After struggling, my kind of tooth and nail to get in there, it was amazing when I got there. I loved it, and I wanted to stay. And obviously, I've never left. But I got a short research post counting dung beetles, yes, dung beetles in cow dung at the University of Texas. And we were trying to understand if there was exposure to different chemicals or diatomaceous earth would have an impact on the dung beetle population after it came through the cows. I also got an internship at Hornsby Bend Biosolids Management Plant, which was also a fantastic environmental research center and a sewage treatment plant and a bird preserve all in one. And it was really great. We used to host school visits from very kind of underprivileged communities that were nearby to us in South Austin. A lot of them were undocumented migrants. And this is where I first learned about food insecurity, was seeing the people who were coming in and taking food back home to their families because they had nothing else. And that was really upsetting, and I still can't really talk about it now. But to lighten the mood a little bit, there was another theme occurring, which was poo. Happily, I have moved on from that. That's the other end of the food system. I'm much more interested in the kind of top side of it now. About the same time, one of my professors I saw most often was Ian Manners, and hopefully he's managed to join us today online. And if it weren't for him, I absolutely would not be here, because he's the one who said, Dianna, you're not bad at this, but you have to learn to start talking. And I can look at Justin and Steve, and they're looking and thinking, you, not talk? But I was tremendously shy, especially in one of his classes, which had only 7 people in it. We had to have these kind of paper-based discussions. But he said, I think you should really consider coming to Oxford. We do a study abroad every year to Oxford. And I was fortunate to be able to. I'd already got a funded place to do a master's. So again, in the US at this time, I was really lucky that we had fully funded master's degrees. 2-year master's degrees, you teach a lot, but you get a degree out of it. And I had pitched to do, you have to also pitch your dissertation idea when you're applying for a master's. I was going to do something around the quality of food grown under organic versus conventional processes, or the soil food web, wasn't really sure which. Either way, I was off to Corvallis at Oregon State University. Loved it, beautiful place. Then I landed in England. I was like, oh my gosh, there's a whole other green, amazing world out here. And I still remember the first sight of the UK out the plane window and being absolutely flabbergasted. Now, you've seen a picture of Texas. It is green. We have nice things there too, but not on the scale that it struck me we did here in the UK. So I thought, well, I'll get back there someday. But in the meantime, I was off to Oregon. Now, I got distracted by yet another news story. This time, it was about women, infants, and children vouchers, very much like our Healthy Start vouchers. And in this case, it was kind of a top-up to the Healthy Start vouchers in the US that gave people $5 to spend at a local farmer's market only on fruit and vegetables. So again, really kind of around the diet quality, how can we improve people's diet quality, super interested, couldn't get ethical approval. I was forced to do a class in geographic information systems. I hated it, and I was bad at it. But GIS, for those of you who don't know, is the kind of map making. That's from ArcView 3.2, very retro. This is a thing that really has given me a huge boost in my career ever since. So I'm saying thank you to my friend Michelle. That was us in Wales in 2023, when she came over here to hang out a little bit. She sat down with me and in half an hour taught me all I needed to know about GIS. So that was really hugely beneficial. And in the meantime, I stumbled across another idea called food deserts. So a food desert is an area, typically urban, typically low income, where there's poor access to healthy and affordable food. This was relatively new back in 2001. And I thought, oh, that sounds cool. And I actually quite love this piece of work because I put together lots of different papers around food cost and food deserts, and I developed my own project, supported by Lane County Food Association, so the very early stages of let's work with someone not in the university. And I did a big piece of work. We compared a food basket price comparison across this part of Oregon at 35 different shops. And I found, this is really surprising, sarcasm, food's more expensive in rural areas, and it's also more expensive at smaller shops. I have to say a lot of my research is a statement of the obvious, but it's about collecting the evidence for the obvious, right? So, really pleased with this. Now, what can we do to make people pay attention to this? So we've got food deserts, we've got inequalities in food costs. It's not fair. What do we do? So I got back to the UK, but not to Oxford. Turns out Leeds is not Oxford, but at the University of Leeds, there was Graham Clark, who was doing work on food deserts, as was Neil Wrigley here at Southampton at the same time, but Leeds offered a full scholarship. And I have chased the money on more than one occasion, obviously. I was really fortunate, actually, to get this scholarship that paid for everything plus a maintenance grant. And so I went there to look at the relationship between access to food and health outcomes, specifically adult obesity, adult type 2 diabetes, and low birth weight. And I did this all very quantitatively. So even though I really wanted to talk to people, that didn't work out, and I started doing GIS. And I ended up doing some spatial interaction modeling and spatial microsimulation, which worked really well. Turns out there was no quantitative relationship between access to food, a really fancy model of access to food, and a model of health outcomes. But I made some amazing friends, and that's who's here in the picture. So at the top is Emma and Olivia and I on Emma's hand-in day. And down at the bottom is Adam, Alison Heppenstall, and Kirk. And Alison is probably one of my oldest and closest friends and the most like family I have here in the UK. So I'm essentially tremendously grateful to Leeds for giving me a whole huge network of people that I still have a really good, close relationship with. And Adam is over at CASA right now. So we've also had a couple of academics turned out of the whole system. I also was fortunate that Mark Birkin gave me a 6-month postdoc, so I had a very soft landing post-PhD, something to go straight into, which made it a little bit less of a difficult transition into what next. Well, what next turned out to be Queen Mary geography. So Steve Cummins was brilliant in this area of food deserts, and when I first got an email from him, I kind of panicked. I thought, oh my gosh, why is Steve Cummins emailing me? Well, because he'd done a web search and found food deserts and found me, and therefore he said, hey, I've got a 6-month postdoc, and clearly I like to follow 6-month postdocs, or anything really, because I was pretty desperate for work. And so I went down to Queen Mary to work with Steve, and he was brilliant. He was really good at kind of explaining the whole process of how to develop an academic career, how to write papers, and here are some of the outputs you can see here from my time. He also supported me in writing fellowships. Lots didn't get funded, but one did, an MRC fellowship. Steve also knew I had no social life, so he, because I just moved to London, didn't know anyone, it wasn't me. He said, look, I do British military fitness, it's really good, it's like outdoor boot camp, you'd love it. I was like, well, I don't really do anything. No, come on. So I did. And in the audience today is my friend Emily and my husband Barney. So thank you, Steve. And my son obviously was the outcome of this too, but from Barney. So that was amazing. And I was, you said to keep it lively. I did have a wobble, though, about staying in academia because, unfortunately, this time my dad got brain cancer and died in the middle of my fellowship. And I just couldn't see the point of measuring access to food anymore. Didn't care. Didn't care about writing papers. Did not care about any of it. But I did care about health, and I did care about equity and fairness. And so I had to think of a way that would get me back into wanting to do work again and not be so miserable. And so I used my GIS skills again, and I catapulted, well, with some help from Trish Greenhow. You might have seen her on Twitter or X or any social media. She is a force to be reckoned with, rather like Ms. Reen. I had this network because they needed someone to make some maps. I made some maps of diabetes risk across East London. And I ended up in a position of moving to Imperial very briefly with a 6-month, yes, 6 months again, position. It did not work. And Trish said, come and interview for a job at Queen Mary. I interviewed, didn't get. She's like, that's all right. I'll give you 6 months off my own kind of research income. Make yourself indispensable. I took her at her word, and I did. So I started doing a lot of teaching with MSc in Global Public Health. I was stuck in short-term contracts. It was very difficult. Applying for funding was impossible because you have to have a contract that outlives the funding. So good luck with that. A lot of failure. I had one terrible job interview the day I came back from maternity leave, which meant that I stood on Euston Road crying, calling my mom. I'm telling you this because it does get better, and because Mary and I shared this story earlier this week, and she said, you should really put that in Inaugural. It's all about failure as well as success. So yes, failure was rife at this point in my life. In the meantime, I had this idea still about the kind of food insecurity risk measure. Oops. And so happily ended up in Southampton with some amazing people. So Graham Moon is a tremendous health geographer and a good colleague who took me over to meet people in public health in week 1. So the kind of networking part of things really moved because I had a lot of support. So I think what I want you to get from this is I've had a huge amount of support throughout my career with lots of amazing people. Dave Martin, who I think many of you will know, Sam Calkins and Jim Wright and I have taught GIS for 10 years or so together now. So I've been fortunate to have a brilliant landing in a room full of colleagues, and a department full of nice people with job security, less teaching, and opportunities to build more skills in leadership, which I was quite interested in. So we've already mentioned the National Center for Research Methods. On top of that, because I had such a great time at my PhD, I want to help other people do this as well. So I got a role very early on with the South Coast Doctoral Training Partnership with Athena, Vlach, and Tony. And I've been doing that for about 4 or 5 years now. So working with PhD students to help them throughout their kind of process of what it's like to do a PhD and moving on to the next thing. I did not get yet another grant, but had another kind of pleasant landing with Center for the South, thanks to Jane Falkingham, who said, look, you're doing some really good things around local policy. There's a space for this kind of work here. We've got this new initiative called Center for the South. Back on the theme of fairness and equity, I was also doing a lot of work on admissions, and Sarah Stevenage, who's at the very bottom there, was the Associate Dean for Education, and said, look, we need someone to lead our access and participation plan for the faculty. So would this be of interest to you? So lots of opportunities for leadership, which are equally as important as research and teaching and developing a career. So thank you, Gabby, and everyone else. Also, as we've already covered, it's not just academics. So I've had a lot of support throughout my academic career from people outside of it. And this was partially started here at Southampton by Public Policy Southampton. Gareth Giles, as we all know him, said, we're going to have kind of a session with Satvir Kaur. She was at that point Councillor Kaur. Come and do a presentation. Everyone gets 5 minutes, and I made a map, and she was like, oh my gosh, that's an amazing map. It was not an amazing map, but it was a map. And again, it was enough. It was the foot in the door that I needed. An introduction to Sarah Crawford followed, and Sarah has been tremendous. So she works at Southampton City Council, has done for many years, and she's given me introductions to everyone else. And she took me on a field trip to Woolston so I could see firsthand the kind of inequalities present in our city. So it's all these kind of support systems that I've had that I've been fortunate to engage with. And I'm just immensely grateful to pretty much everyone on the slide. And most of the time when I have a kind of vague research idea, I take it to Southampton City Council or Hampshire County Council or Southampton City Mission and say, here's what I think might be interesting. Does it fit with what you need? How can we make it work better? And Ravita or Vicky or someone else at the council will come back and they'll tell me something and we'll develop this idea together. And that's what's led to the success of funding with the NIHR Applied Research Collaboration. And finally, the big one. We've already heard about this. It tells people where we expect food insecurity to be higher It's kind of like the index multiple deprivation score, but it's all about food. It's been used a lot, so thank you, Justin. I can skip this slide. I also, again, have worked quite closely in public health as well as geography, because it's a really nice place to be, and so my friend Nisreen is here, and she's been tremendous. And as part of this, we've had so many projects together, PhD students and collaborations, and not just food, but mental health. Not our mental health, but other people's mental health. And again, the kind of access issues of access to food quality, access to mental health, services. So we've had Wessex Friend, Wessex Diet, again, both co-designed with non-academics. And it's, among other people, Nisreen, Nida, Elizabeth, and Grace, who've been involved with all of this. Again, we won't talk about the risk index anymore. Let's talk about food some more. So I stumbled upon a project in the New Forest where I live. Citizen Device did a web search, found me, and thought, hey, you might be interested in the kind of data we have. And what that led to actually was a consultancy project understanding what makes it hard to live well in the New Forest. And it comes out, mixed methods project, 70 surveys, 30 people we spoke to. These are the kind of factors which come in. So again, food is here, but it's not the only thing here. So people who are experiencing food poverty, which were the majority of our sample, were also experiencing difficulties with housing costs, transportation, getting somewhere, getting the right kind of job that paid enough money. All these factors are really important. And I revisited my master's degree and did another food basket comparison. So with people in Citizens Advice, we co-designed a basket of 20 items, and we priced it out at every shop that we could across the New Forest, which everyone thinks is a really wealthy area, but we have pockets of real deprivation, not just in the urban areas, but also in the more rural areas. And what we found was there was a huge difference. There was about £20 difference between a Tesco Express in Brockenhurst, a nice, beautiful little village, and the big Tesco in New Milton. And this persisted in 2023 when I followed up as well. So that's a big chunk of money. That was the universal credit uplift during lockdown, wiped out at once. Fish fingers do come in. The prices range from 69p to £3.30, depending on what brand was available. So there we go. Credit to one of the undergraduate students who first came up with this idea. Fish fingers is an indicator item at Tesco's only, 69p at the big ones, because you can get the kind of sub-generic brand of Hearty Food Company. Or you can get the Bird's Eye omega-3 fish fingers at your Tesco Express, which is the only option available. 10 fish fingers, same thing, okay, quality difference probably, but the price difference is huge. And that's what people are facing when they don't have another option besides Tesco Express. And that still frustrates me, to put it mildly. Now, to quote Duncan, food aid was not planned, but it's where we are. This is a project that we developed around understanding whether food pantries, the model where food is, you pay for a bit of money, and you pay a bit of money and you go shopping, and there's also the wraparound support of, again, social prescribers, Citizens Advice, or so forth. You go once a week and this happens. This was Wessex Diet. And again, it was a mixed method study where we looked at whether it made a difference for people in terms of their mental health, food security status, or diet quality. And what we found is that it does matter. It's really hard to quantify these things. And again, if you're talking about food, there's usually multiple things going on. So giving people a bit more food each week is not going to fix food insecurity for them. It's not going to automatically make things better. It will improve their diet. People told us, I'm trying to find Elizabeth in the room, Elizabeth and I sat in food pantries for weeks on end, and they told us about what a difference it made in terms of they were now eating fruit and vegetables, or they were able to buy things that they wanted to because they had more money available. But here's some nice quotes from it as well, and I'm going to pause for a second and let you read that. So people felt better. They were able to develop some sense of community by being there as well. And when I went there a year on to give the results and kind of updates to the same participants, they had indeed formed relationships and friendships and were giving each other lifts to the food pantries. So there are a lot of benefits to be had to this model. So there are very, very good outcomes from food aid, and especially food pantries, and we can certainly show that here in Southampton, which is good news. Almost done, folks. So the big project. Again, this has all been incremental. So we did the food insecurity risk measure, and I was working on that from roughly 2014 to 2018 until it got published. Then we got some money to build a website where people could download the data, which is what led to the kind of uptake that Justin was speaking about, £15,000. Then we got Wessex Friend to update the food insecurity risk measure. It was a bit more money. And then, after many failed attempts of many grant applications, One landed. And I didn't believe it so much, I had to get Jim Wright to come read the email to confirm that, in fact, it was successful. In my defense, it did say you have no score, which I thought, oh my gosh, they've sent the email to the wrong person. But they didn't. It was us. And it was, again, one of these co-created collaborative projects, which includes all the local authorities until devolution happens, here in the local area around the New Forest, Isle of Wight, and Southampton. It's working with community researchers, not people like me, going into food pantries to find out what sort of things we can do in the food pantries to make them work better for folks. What kind of add-ons could we have? Cooking sessions, box schemes, what might work better? And we're also going to create like a really fancy, we hope, I'm looking at Ian over here, an online sharing platform where people can say, hey, I've got 2 pallets of bananas, and someone else can say, hey, I've got a pallet of bread, and then we'll figure out how to equitably share it across the New Forest or Southampton or the Isle of Wight. Watch this space and check in with me in 3 years to see how that goes. We'll also be monitoring for changes like we have for diet. So the same sort of surveys and tests that we know work well for understanding how people are benefiting or not from using food aid will be used in this study in addition. And we're going to be modeling future health inequalities. So once we build these kind of additional interventions, and once we understand the impact of any interventions, we're going to use all sorts of things that are not my responsibility, thankfully. Causal loop diagrams, I think, come to mind, but Craig's not here for me to ask. And we're going to model what health might look like in 5, 10, and 15 years' time in FAIR. So I'm really excited about this. Also, because I get to work with all of my friends. That's the other benefit of being in this area of work. There's lots of work in this space around trying to make the food system fair. So I should have said, which I forgot, is the whole point is to make the food in the food pantries better. We're going to be working with local producers, local growers, local organizations to get the healthy produce into the food pantry so we're not so reliant on ambient goods, ultra-processed goods, high-fat, salt, sugar, and so on. So it's about creating a more sustainable option in terms of getting food moving around less. I'm, again, not critiquing fair share, but we're going to try and do something a little bit different to keep it more local to the system and to get healthier food options in there, as well as talking to people about who are using the service about how to make it better for them. Food Sequel, that's what I was trying to say. Food Sequel is a really excellent project which was led at the University of Reading, but also Plymouth and took place in Brighton, that worked, again, around food and community research is very much in the same space. Also, more hopeful news, the National Food Strategy is being revisited. We are looking at child poverty again more critically, and the free school meal extension to children on universal credit has been really helpful, and that will make a difference to people who are experiencing food insecurity in this country. So be hopeful. I know it's been a bit of a downer of a talk with food poverty. I'm pleased I didn't cry, sometimes I do, because I do find it really distressing and disappointing that we are in a situation in this wealthy country where so many people, whether it's 10%, 13.9%, or 20%, are experiencing food insecurity. But things are moving in the right direction. There are groups working towards this. There's the Southampton Food Partnership and many more sustainable food places. And according to the National Food Strategy press release, they're going to be providing more easily accessible and affordable healthy food. So we are all on the same page. Let's try to make this work. That's it. So thank you. 2 more slides. Don't clap yet. My son pointed out that my cat is at the center of the picture here, and there's probably not an accident either. She's great, and she never complains. But most of all, thank you to everyone who's here, to all of my friends, including Emily and Charlie, who's online, and who I don't get to thank anywhere else because we don't work together. That was why they had to slip into this slide. But especially to my family. And libraries. I had to move on quickly there, didn't I? Where do libraries fit in? Well, it goes back to structural resources. When I was stuck in the garden center in a very hot summer, a nice lady came by who worked at the library and said, your daughter likes to read a lot. Do you think she might want to come hang out at the library? Oh, what an amazing thing. And it meant that I had resources all around me, more books to read than ever. I, at one point, as a very kind of somewhat naive, somewhat arrogant 13-year-old, checked out every Shakespearean play I could find, because I was sure I could read them and get through them. Again, not lacking ambition, if a bit flaky. But it does reinforce that I was somewhere where I had a library to go to, with someone saying, maybe you should consider doing this. So I could really indulge in this kind of love of reading and exploring things and just wandering around a library because they smell really nice. And the books are fascinating, right? And it was air conditioned. And that was amazing. And that's it for me. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Dianna, for a very inspirational and personal talk. Fascinating. I'm not sure if I'm hungry now. I've lost my appetite. I'm not really sure. We have time for questions. Steve, how long do we have? Maybe we've got 10 minutes. 10 minutes, okay. So questions for Dianna.
Nice questions. Mary.
There's a microphone.
Thank you, Dianna. That was just lovely. Thank you. Politics.
I said nice questions.
Do you really think we are moving in the right direction? How confident are you?
I'm trying to be positive. So I think what I see is much like what we saw during COVID, where there is a huge groundswell of people who want to see things done differently. I mean, look around us in the room. There are so many folks working towards the same goals that we have. And I met with Jenny Baverstock, who's a core part of the FAIR project here at the university, and Carol Wagstaff earlier today, and talked about all the different food projects going on around the country. I think once you start thinking about that, and Dominic, who's sitting in front of you as well, who's been doing a lot of work for his PhD in this topic area and research, and Emma sitting up behind you, there's so many of us working this space with communities collaboratively to make a difference that I think there will be enough, hopefully, to see changes happening. But maybe
are those changes going to get into government? Are they going to leak as far as government, though? That is the question.
I don't want to go too political because I'll get really angry. So maybe can we pick that up over a glass of warm white wine after this?
Love to.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah, one in the middle here.
Hello. I'm one of those volunteers in one of those food banks in Southampton. And we deliver shopping to about 80 families every week. Clearly, you said that you don't think that's good enough. The quality of the food is good enough. So I would like to know, how can we do better? Do you have advice on how to improve the service that we provide?
So thank you. The critique is very much not aimed at you or at Duncan or at any other food bank or food aid charity who are doing their absolute best to get food to where people need it and to get to food to where the people who need it the most. My critique is the system which we're reliant on having to buy food in, which is affordable for the food banks, or rely on the surplus food to be redistributed to the food banks in order for the needs of people who are food insecure to be met. So what we're trying to do with the Fair Food Project is to make more relationships locally to ensure that the fresh, the healthier food that might not come to you otherwise will be redirected into where it needs to be most, in a way that's not kind of moving out of the area and back into the area. So the critique is very much not with you. I'm very grateful for what you're doing, but I think the challenge is how we get food where it needs to be, which is logistics. Thankfully, we have Bazad on the project for that. There's Bazad. He's a logistics guy. But we'll be working on this. I'd love to follow up with you as well.
Thanks, Dianna. Really cool talk. I'm picking up on one of the points you made. It was some of the people that you've been involved with and the comments they made, and it was about the opportunity to talk with people and discuss. But sort of picking up on that, and then you said many of them had kind of enjoyed healthier food, I think, after. Yeah. So it's a role of education, and where was that as a result of those discussions, or was it the supply of the food? And that the kind of question I'm picking up on big hitting Tory politicians like Lee Anderson, who would
people
say,
need to learn how to cook and they'll be okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So how does all that fit in, and is that something you're going to pick up in your kind of Fair Food project? Most
people know how to cook. Most people know exactly what they should be eating. It's the barriers are elsewhere, and they're typically economic and they're typically structural. So it's things like, when they tell you should really batch cook and it's a really great way to save money. Have you ever lived in a house with a fridge with a freezer the size of an ice cube tray? You can't batch cook, right? So we're talking about people who are time and resource poor, but also just don't have the kind of other stuff needed to follow the excellent advice, which most people are well aware of. There is a space for education for everyone, and I do mean for everyone, because if you look at the entire country, only about 25% of the population have 5 a day of fruit and veg, but we all pretty much know that's what we should be aiming for. So there is space for education, but I'm not going to be prescriptive about it. I'm going to let the community researchers tell us, what do you want that's going to be helpful to you? And if it's cooking pots and pans and air fryers, which many more food banks and food pantries are providing now, then that will be a part of our answer.
Any more questions? Yeah, there's a couple here. I don't know who was first, maybe at the back.
Do you think really we shouldn't be needing to do this, and that we've lost working class jobs which pay money?
Oh, that's a loaded question. I think we should not be, what do I think? I think we should not be in a situation where people who are working or not working, I don't want to place judgment on why someone is food insecure. That is not my place. My place is to try and deal with food insecurity and to think about how we can support people effectively. So I don't want to turn this into who deserves food and who doesn't deserve food necessarily.
We see some very big corporations which don't pay tax, and
Well,
we
yes.
as the British state are subsidising their wages every week.
Yes. I'm going to dodge that question. I'll pick it up with you later.
Jedi.
Hi, Dianna. Nice talk and good overview. In all your work that you did, you briefly mentioned maps.
Oh, yes, maps. GIS.
Yeah. Was there a role of using those geospatial data and maps in your research, and are they helpful? What's your view on it?
Jadu, it's almost as though you're the head of geospatial at Southampton to ask a question like that. Yes, so going back to my initial discussion of having the first meeting at Southampton City Council, where I put a really not very good map up, and that was a thing that was like, oh my goodness, it's a map. We need more maps. The food insecurity risk measure, people loved the visual of it because they can zoom in and say, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. Or wait a second, gosh, it's a lot worse than I thought. The visual side is tremendous in terms of communication, in making a case, and advocacy. So yes, I think there's a strong rationale for responsible maps that are accurate. And I think that the easy thing is, we all know that famous book, How to Lie with Maps. So there's a huge amount of responsibility with making maps as well, and making sure that we're showing the right thing in the right way, with the right color scheme. It's true, it's not that funny. Are we done now?
Justin, Dianna, if I may, there's a question that's been posted online, and this is a fantastic question. So thank you to Nicola Shelton.
Oh, hi, Nicola.
So Nicola says, that was a great talk. If you had to decide, would you spend budget on a library or a food bank?
Oh. Both. I'd split it. That is very tricky. Even Trussell are now saying there shouldn't be food banks anymore, and their motto has kind of shifted over the years. So we shouldn't have food banks. We need libraries. Universal basic income. That's it. That's my answer.
Unless there's a pressing question, I think that's a really good point to stop. And can we give another big round of applause to Dianna?
Yeah, no, that's fantastic talks. Both of our speakers, I'm sure you'll agree, absolutely inspiring. Isn't it fantastic to have wonderful colleagues like this who can give us such brilliant insights into their work and how they got here as well. That's it. Thank you, everybody. I would just like to invite you to join us. We have a little bit of food, some nibbles and some drinks of a variety of types, including the warm white. So please come and join us and continue the conversation. Thanks again both to Clive and to Dianna.